some local perspectives on their GLRI work. And then we will have 17-minute sessions on each of the 5 focus areas for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And here's where there'll be an opportunity for everyone to provide their input on what your priorities are on GLRI. Again, this session is really us to hear from everyone on your priorities for the GLRI for the next 5 years. I do want to acknowledge that there is some media on the call today. It's my understanding a media advisory went out this morning, and there will be some opportunities for interviews if you are interested. And I just ask that you contact Macy Presley, and I believe her contact information is both on the media advisory and in the chat as well. And with that, I would like to turn it back over to Chelsea to give us some logistics information.
Thanks, Todd. Just a few notes for this Zoom session today. You'll have noted that all of your microphones are off to go through this meeting. We encourage folks to locate the Q&A in your menu feature right now in Zoom. It should either be on the black bar on the bottom or at the top, depending on your setup. If you're using a smaller device like a cell phone or a tablet, it may be in the ... more section, Q&A. You're able to submit questions, comments, any type of input through that Q&A box throughout the meeting. You're also able to submit questions, comments, input anonymously in that box. There's also a feature to upvote, a little thumbs up, so that others can see that you've liked that question or you have that same question yourself. We'll use that as a guide of which questions we should tackle first, because we do have a good number of people in this meeting, so we may not get to address everything that is put into the Q&A box. If you would prefer to ask your question verbally when we get to that part of the presentation, there is the raise hand feature. If you, again, in that same menu bar, whether it's at the top or bottom of your screen, if you look for reactions, there is a raise hand that will allow us to know that you are interested in speaking. Todd will call on you and we'll be able to unmute your mic for you to participate verbally at the right time of this meeting. Now, if you run into problems with Zoom, you can't hear, there's some other issue unrelated to the meeting content, you can use the chat box to chat to the hosts, and we will help you with whatever issue you are having. And as our electronic voice has already asked you, we are recording this session to make sure that we are capturing all of the input so that we have it in our memory banks and our recorded memory banks so that we can make sure that it is going to be used in the action plan. So that is all of our session logistics. Let's actually turn it over to get started.
Thank you, Chelsea. And with that, I'd like to introduce the Director of EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office, Chris Korleski, to kick us off.
Okay, so sound check, team. Am I on and I'm visible? Okay. Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm so delighted that we have so many people with us today. It looked like we had about 250 registrants, which is outstanding. And I'm also blown away by the variety of organizations and folks who registered. And just a quick point on that. Looking at the sheet, I see a lot of names and organizations that we've worked with for 10 years, and that is great. We're so glad you're here. I'm equally as excited by if this is the first time you've ever called in to a GLNPO call, or this is your first involvement with the GLRI. I'm even more excited that you're here, because the whole point of doing what we're doing today and in other events is to try to hear from as many stakeholders as we can about our action plan, our upcoming action plan 4. But really glad you're here, and I'm going to go ahead and dive in and get started. First, I do want to start with a statement, make I think a well-deserved acknowledgement to our tribal members. The Great Lakes Basin is the homeland of 35 federally recognized tribal governments in the US, and tens of thousands of Native Americans live throughout the Great Lakes Basin and call it home. Many of these tribal nations maintain special treaty rights to hunt, fish, and gather beyond the borders of their reservations. We recognize their rights and their ancient connections to this land. We value our partnerships with the tribes in implementing the GLRI, and we acknowledge their significant contributions to protecting and restoring this shared treasure, the Great Lakes. Okay, so folks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few minutes and I'm going to just very, I don't want to say superficially, but in very quick terms, cover both the GLRI and the GLRI action plan. Again, many of you are familiar with this. Many of you may not be. So let me just take a few and sort of set the stage. So first, before we talk about the action plan in particular, let's talk about the GLRI. What is that exactly? What does that mean? So the GLRI has been around since 2010. And to boil this down, I think of the GLRI as really being two things. It's money and it's effective partnerships. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, for many years prior to 2010, there had been a recognition by many stakeholders, the members of the public, state agencies, for everybody who's represented on this call today, and many others, that the Great Lakes needed help. For many years, any number of problems had been identified, whether it was work not getting done in areas of concern, whether it was nutrient overloads leading to harmful algal blooms, whether it was the threat of invasive or I should say terrestrial or aquatic invasive species, like the invasive carp, which is probably the first thing that comes to everybody's mind when we talk about that. So there'd been a lot of work by a lot of people. There was a regional collaborative, and a wonderful strategy was put together. But in 2010, the magic happened, and that's when Congress actually devoted $475 million to this thing called the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, or the GLRI. That was a game changer. And the great news is, since 2010, we have been funded at roughly $300 million a year. I'll just let you know that over the last few years, we've been bumping up. Congress has seen fit to bump up our annual appropriation. Just to put it in perspective, for fiscal year 23, we were funded at $368 million, which was a $20 million increase over the year before. That's really important because it reflects the fact that Congress thinks, or at least I like to think it reflects the fact that Congress thinks that we are doing good things with this very large financial investment that Congress is giving us. I also need to mention that in addition to those generous annual appropriations, that under the bipartisan infrastructure law, there was an additional $1 billion, that's with a B, $1 billion also added to the GLRI to help us continue to do all the work that we're doing. So the money is great. We couldn't get anything done without the money, but equally as important to the GLRI is the partnerships that have developed since the program was first funded in 2010. And when I talk about partnerships, I really mean effective partnerships between and among many federal partners. 16 federal agencies help implement the GLRI. Many of them are on the call today. Our wonderful tribal partners, again, going back to the 35 federally recognized nations, some of the tribal nations are deeply invested in the GLRI and highly effective partners, as are our 8 Great Lakes states, who we've developed over the years very effective working relationships with our states. Also, many NGOs we partner with. We partner with academia. We partner with local communities. And the reason I think the GLRI has worked so well is because of the extremely effective, collegial, and cooperative nature of those partnerships. I know that word gets used a lot, but I will emphasize, in this case, it is for real. And between the money and the information sharing and those candid and collegial relationships between all the partners involved here, we are getting a tremendous amount of work done. So I'm going to keep moving here, and I'm not going to call out any particular highlights of the GLRI. I think many of you are aware of the work that has been done and is being done with regard to finally getting at those areas of concern after so many years. The work we're doing on invasive species like invasive carp to keep them, at least to keep the silver and bighead out of the Great Lakes. The work that we're doing with trying to reduce the amount of nutrients getting into our Great Lake water bodies. And that, I will just stop and note, that continues to be a big challenge. But we are going to keep moving. And that gets me to what we're here to talk about today, which is the GLRI action plan. All right, so now you know what the GLRI is. What is this action plan? In essence, it's the blueprint for what we do. The way we operate on 5-year action plans. Right now, for example, we're operating under Action Plan 3. We're holding the call today because we've already started the process of developing Action Plan 4, which will cover the fiscal years 25 through 29. So that may seem like we have a lot of time plenty of time to draft this. No, it comes up quickly. And a big part of our action plan process is getting input from, for example, everyone on this call today. So the action plan, I will hold it up. It looks like this. This is action plan 3. Oh, it's about 30 pages long. And in a nutshell, it contains objectives and commitments and measures of progress in all the focus areas that we're going to cover today, some of which I've already mentioned. But to cut to the chase, the whole purpose that we're having this call today is because we would like to get your input on what we can do to make Action Plan 4 better than Action Plan 3. It would be an understatement to say we are open to suggestion. We are. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot more time on that because this is really about you, but a couple quick comments. So we're having this call today and we're very excited about it. And we want to hear either in the chat or in the comment box, or if you want to get your mic opened up, we want to hear from you about what we can do. But please understand, this is not the only means by which you can provide that input. Everyone, I think, knows or should know that there is an email address, which is specifically for providing us written comments, written input on what we can do to improve Action Plan 4. So we've got an email address. We have a website you can go to. And because of the nature of this meeting, my guess is that many of you are going to want to make more extensive comments than you're going to have time to do today. So again, this is not the only opportunity, and please take advantage of those other opportunities. I think you also know we are out and about. We're going to be doing some out in the field engagement sessions with a number of people. We've already done one in Cleveland. We're heading to Duluth and Rochester in July. Other ones to be scheduled. There's going to be additional virtual sessions like this, but again, I really encourage you, take the time to put your thoughts in writing, and in particular, be as specific as you can in your comments, because the more specific you are, the more helpful that is to us. I mean, we all want to make the plan better, but really honing in on, here's what I think you need to do in GLRI world to make this plan work better. That's what we're looking for, is that kind of specificity. So keep those cards and letters coming, so to speak. And then I'm going to just one last comment, and then I'm going to introduce our local speakers who are going to share with you some of their own GLRI experiences. So one of the things that I think many people are aware that EPA is currently very, very, very heavily invested in is environmental justice. And it is difficult to capture the amount of effort that's going in the environmental justice arena, not just here within the Great Lakes National Program Office, but across the EPA. And we want that to be reflected in Action Plan 4. So that's something that I just want to get out there already, that this administration has made it very clear that we need to do a better job of doing restoration and protection work in communities that historically we haven't, and we need to get out there and do that. I'll also mention climate change. I don't think I need to say a whole lot about that. I expect everyone on this call is pretty well versed in the changes that indeed we're already seeing. So we're also looking for comments on how we can better address climate change through the action plan. So I wanted you to bear that in mind as well. So now, instead of me continuing to talk, I'm going to introduce 3 speakers. I'm going to do them one at a time to share their localized experiences with the GLRI. And first, Aaron, if you're ready, I'm going to go to Aaron Houghton with New Water, who's going to talk about harvestable buffers for nutrient removal. So Aaron, if you're live, you've got the floor, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. Thanks, Chris. I'm really looking forward to being able to talk with you today about some of our projects here in Northeast Wisconsin. Can you move on to the next slide? Awesome, thank you. All right, so the image you see before you kind of demonstrates some of our program successes from our Silver Creek pilot project and just successes in implementing conservation practices while at the same time, keeping and maintaining a productive agricultural system. So who's New Water? New Water is the brand of the Green Bay Metropolitan Sewage District. We were established in 1931, and we're a wholesaler of wastewater to 15 municipal customers and treat on average around 41 million gallons of wastewater a day. New Water's work is really motivated by our vision statement, which is protecting our most valuable resource, water. Not only in just the treatment process or the treatment of wastewater, but also in our efforts to protect our natural freshwater resources and the communities that we serve. Our vision statement is important as we do have a lot of water quality issues here in Northeast Wisconsin that are really largely driven by excessive sediment and nutrients that you'll see here on the next slide. If you can move on. So here in Northeast Wisconsin, research has really demonstrated that spring and fall runoff events account for around 70 to 80% of all nutrient sediment loading annually. And you can see in the MODIS image and in our drone imagery here on the left-hand side, just images of a typical spring runoff that we experience here in Northeast Wisconsin, right at the mouth of the Fox River into Lower Green Bay. And managing this runoff quality, but also the quantity is really vital in reducing these excess nutrients and sediment from entering into our systems and creating these impairments. So in 2014, New Water, with funding from GLRI, started a Silver Creek pilot project working with landowners and operators just to even see if it would be possible to work with folks on a voluntary basis and get them to actually apply these conservation practices to the landscape to kind of better protect and improve our impaired water quality. It was a success, and we were really excited about how we were able to bring together a lot of different organizations, leverage everyone's expertise, and kind of build this pilot project into kind of a successful watershed program. We then were able to build it out into a larger watershed program and moving over into the neighboring watersheds of Ashwaubenon Creek and Dutchman Creek, or ACDC for short and kind of for fun. But trying to continue these efforts here in ACDC of implementing these conservation practices through voluntary basis and outreach to try and again reduce these excessive sediment and nutrient loads to our streams, and instead keep these resources on the land where they can really be more productive. In our currently funded GLRI project, we're working on establishing vegetated and in most cases harvestable buffers between farm fields and the headwater reaches of these impaired tributaries to the lower Fox River. And in most cases, as you can see here in the right-hand image, we're trying to pair these conservation practices up with other conservation practices. So in this case, we paired a buffer along with a 2-stage ditch to really kind of maximize the water quality benefits that we're realizing. Now moving on to wrap up with my last slide. Could you move on to the last slide? Oh. There we go. Thank you. So GLRI funding has really helped fund the Silver Creek pilot project, as well as the implementation of these vegetated buffers in our headwater reaches of ACDC. And the assistance from GLRI has really just been a huge catalyst for our watershed program, and I know for many others like it, to just demonstrate how effective we can be with our communities, that these conservation practices work. It helps us to gain trust with the landowners and operators that our programs are dedicated to the work and trying to see these things through, and they can feel comfortable and understanding and feel heard through our programs, that we're meeting their land management goals as well as the water quality goals in our region. We were also fortunate enough last summer to bring out Santina Wortman and Noel Vargas into the Silver Creek and ACDC watershed to kind of view some of the accomplishments from both of those projects, and just look forward to sharing more success stories with you in the future. Thank you.
Aaron, thank you very much. Thanks so much for joining us. And now we're going to turn to Jennifer. I hope I get this right. Is it Jennifer Canine or Canine? Canine, I would think. Canine. Okay, Jennifer Canine. She's the director of the Department of Natural Resources for the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians in Michigan. So Jennifer, I'm not going to try, because I'm sure I will mispronounce the name of the river. So please take it away. And we're so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the Dowagiac River Restoration Project on tribal properties. The project is located in southwestern Michigan in the Dowagiac River watershed, a sub-watershed of the St. Joseph River watershed. The river's cold water or cool water, which is unique to southwestern Michigan. And you see the river as it is here flowing through tribal properties. The upper aerial image in this figure shows the dredged and straightened river, and the lower image is LiDAR showing the river how it was before dredging occurred. The historic meanders can be seen on either side of the dredged river within the floodplains. So this project is a decade in the making. The first application for funding occurred in 2011 with a feasibility study. The project was determined feasible because it is surrounded by tribal properties. We have completed multiple assessments and surveys, including a LiDAR flyover in 2012, depth to refusal checks, soil borings, a NEPA environmental assessment, threatened and endangered species surveys, DIPL review, wetland delineation, and hydraulic analysis. So our hydraulic analysis showed no negative impact to neighbors during a 100-year storm event. We have obtained multiple permits and agreements, including a county soil erosion and sediment control permit, a signed agreement with the county drain commissioner, because this river is considered a legal drain, and an overall project permit from My Eagle and Army Corps of Engineers, as well as several temporary river crossing permits. In order to keep the project moving forward, multiple years of funding from multiple sources have been secured. So due to the complexity and the cost of the restoration, the project was split into two phases. Phase 1 started on March 12th of 2022 with substantial completion by October 24th, 2022. Phase 1 restored 2 historic meander bends to the river. Phase 2 started November 15th, 2022, with substantial completion anticipated in October of 2023. The reason for this is that we do need to plant trees, shrubs, and live stakes in the fall of this year. Phase 2 restores 3 historic meander bends to the river. Following completion of both phases, 0.66 miles of dredge straightened river are being restored to 1.29 miles of meandering river that is reconnected to the floodplains. Hydrology is being restored to approximately 53 acres of wetlands within the floodplains. There are enhanced habitats for plant and animal species of cultural significance to the Pokagon Band, including niche habitats for migratory fish and needed spawning, feeding, and fry habitat. Since the river is open to fish for the first time in 100 years due to a dam being removed, the project area is more resilient to climate change, provides for additional flood storage, and reduces sedimentation within the river. We've had 7 grant partners help fund the project, including BIA GLRI, EPA GLRI, and NOAA GLRI. I would like to thank you for letting me share our project with you today.
So Jennifer, thank you so much. And your presentation in just a few minutes clarified 2 very important points. One, how great the work is that's being done under the GLRI across the Great Lakes Basin. And 2, while the work we're doing is great, very little of that work is easy. And I think Jennifer's point about the number of people who had to be involved, makes that point and also makes the point about the importance of the partnerships that I addressed earlier. So Jennifer, thank you so much. And now we're going to go to Kathy Evans from the Muskegon Lake Watershed Partnership. Kathy, I'll just say that I think many people on the call know how invested you were in the Muskegon projects. So we're delighted to have you, and you've got the floor. Thank you.
Oh, Kathy, you are still muted.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Chris. The GLRI area of concern investment that has remediated and restored Muskegon Lake through the removal of toxic hotspots of contaminated sediments and the restoration of fish and wildlife habitat, mostly right along the former industrial urban waterfront, have also led to more than $70 million in waterfront redevelopments, with another $300 million in the planning and development stages. And most of these developments are mixed-use marina, boat storage, and residential types of developments. In addition, there have been increases in water-based recreation and tourism, including Great Lakes cruise ships. We have increases in revenue from Muskegon County's tax on hotel rooms, and there have been increases in property values for residents who live off the shoreline in the older existing neighborhoods within walking distance of the restored shoreline. But maybe just as important, our local experience under the AOC focus area have resulted in stronger local partnerships, technical expertise, and community engagement, planning and restoration experiences that bode well for advancing the future protection and continued restoration of the Great Lakes well beyond the goals of the AOC program. So we've done so much here, and we are not done. We want to keep working on Great Lakes restoration. So moving on to the next slide, just an example of one of the projects that I think was really, it's a good example of community engagement and working from remediation to restoration and revitalization is the combination of the Ruddiman Creek Legacy Act project that was done back in 2006, well before habitat restoration was included in the Legacy Act. And also the Amico Fish and Wildlife Habitat Restoration Project along the Muskegon Lake shoreline at the mouth of the creek. And so because there was no ability to restore habitat or really do any other community benefit type work in the Legacy Act, and especially back in 2006, Glenpoe helped the community determine what our needs would be for future habitat restoration by facilitating a public charrette that resulted in a plan for future habitat improvements, recreational improvements, and other things that the community desired on the heels of this toxic cleanup. So that early input was really critical in helping the area of concern residents have a voice in ensuring that public access to a stretch of shoreline that was valued for fishing from shore and scenic views and walking or biking along the Lakeshore Trail, that would remain available or be enhanced so that people could really enjoy the restored resources fully. And so that's just one of our shining examples of kind of a combination where Legacy Act and GLRI habitat work under the AOC focus area really resulted in something that the community is really, really enjoying right now. In fact, some images from it were on a billboard for the Lakeshore Living Home and Garden Show recently along the highway here in Muskegon County. So people really, really are loving that scenic shoreline. Next slide just kind of goes just a little bit into detail about some of the resiliency and climate change adaptation features that were built into that project, because the shoreline at the mouth of Ruddiman Creek, that project was completed in 2022. Well, between 2006, when we did the remediation of the creek, and 2022, lake levels rose. But what we were able to do is successfully reconnect previously isolated and degraded wetlands behind this former bulk petroleum storage facility, Standard Oil dock, with the lake, with the mouth of the creek. We addressed effects of climate change by removing this failed and eroding section of bike path from the lake and restoring shallow water habitat. And now the bike path is at a higher elevations to prevent future erosion from potential high water levels in Lake Michigan and Muskegon Lake. And the project was also designed to prevent exacerbation of known environmental conditions from the more upland portions of the Standard Oil Dock and British Petroleum tank farm, which has been raised and is being monitored by the responsible parties. So this is a very complex area. We have a lot of those kinds of examples along the shoreline of Muskegon Lake, where brownfield shorelines and underwater contaminated sediments are kind of co-located. And so need to be dealt with very carefully. So next slide, the monitoring of this habitat at this particular site at the mouth of the creek on the lake is ongoing. It was a result of the permits, the state and federal permits. They required 5 years of post-restoration monitoring. So that was a little bit of a challenge for us, but we were able to figure out how to get that done, partially by extending some grant money under GLRI, but also with the help of local residents and citizen scientists and the city of Muskegon, who are all working together to make sure that that post-restoration monitoring is getting done. And that'll go on for still a couple of years. Next slide, just to kind of cap things off here, I think. The Muskegon Lake Watershed Partnership, we're really still very involved in the final stages of delisting Muskegon Lake as an area of concern. And at the same time, we're becoming very much more involved in the effort to ensure that local residents have meaningful public access to these restored natural resources, because development pressure is on. Development is great. It's doing a lot of good for the community. But we want to make sure that we don't lose the local residents' ability to access those restored resources as well. We're celebrating the recent removal of 2 of our habitat beneficial use impairments right now. We have an informational public event and a tour planned for Tuesday, July 11th at noon. We'll be at Grand Valley State University's Water Resources Institute, and then we'll be touring some of the habitat restoration sites following that. And we will also be providing that as an option through Zoom, and you are all welcome and encouraged to join us. If you'd like to know more, you can find out more by emailing Kathy at muskegonlake.org or by visiting the website at muskegonlake.org. Thanks.
Okay, now I think I'm unmuted. So Kathy, thank you so much for the presentation, demonstrating your mastery of all things Muskegon AOC. So we very much appreciate you joining us today. I just want to thank Aaron and Jennifer and Kathy for first just clearly demonstrating better than I could ever try to describe, again, how important the partners are. These are the partners that are getting the kind of work that we need to get done. So thank you for making that point for me. And also just demonstrating the incredible quality of the environmental projects that we're doing. So I want to thank our 3 folks for the local perspectives, and I'm going to kick it back to Todd, who's going to moderate the remainder of today's call. And folks, one last comment from me. Remember that email address for submitting your input. We really would like to hear from you. So thank you. Thanks to our panelists, and Todd, back to you.
Great, thank you, Chris. And I want to echo the thanks to Kathy, Aaron, and Jennifer as well. So now we turn to the part of our segment of this webinar where we want to hear from you. But to kick off, we are breaking this into 5 segments of about 17 minutes each across each of the 5 focus areas. So first, I'm going to introduce Andrea Schaller with EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office to talk about AOCs and toxic substances.
Thanks, Todd. As Todd mentioned, my name is Andrea Schaller, and I'm the acting branch manager at EPA, and in the Focus Area 1 lead. This focus area includes areas of concerns and
I just want to check it. Can anyone else hear Andrea right now? No?
Nope.
So while we wait for Andrea to join via another area, I'll just briefly sort of fill in for her and let her know where we stopped. So this focus area covers two major categories. The first is areas of concern. The next is toxic substances. So related to areas of concern, we've accomplished a lot under the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. Kathy did a fantastic job of outlining all the successful projects that have occurred in the Muskegon Lake area of concern. We've completed the cleanup at other areas of concern where we've actually been able to delist them as well. That includes the Ashtabula River in Ohio, the Lower Menominee River on the border of Michigan and Wisconsin. And in addition to cleaning up completing all the necessary work in Muskegon Lake, we've also done that in the Buffalo River area of concern as well. Over 6 million cubic yards of contaminated sediment have been removed, and we've removed over 100 impairments in these AOCs. We're closing in on reaching half of those. And with that, I will turn it back over to Andrea to talk about our future goals in the areas of concern.
Thanks, Todd, for covering while my internet shut down. So as Todd talked about where we have been doing work, where we plan to be by the end of Action Plan 3, we expect work to be completed in 17 of the areas of concerns, completing over 60 projects, including remediating millions of cubic yards of polluted mud and creating new habitat for fish and wildlife. These efforts will cut in half the number of ecological impairments known as beneficial use impairments. Under Action Plan 4, we plan on continuing our efforts to reach the moonshot goal, completing all work in AOC in 22 of the 25 AOCs by the end of 2030. As I noted earlier before I cut out, we also cover in Focus Area 1, chemical contaminations, which are an important stressor to monitor and assess in the Great Lakes. Specifically, we support the development of an effective outreach materials, communicating advice to consumers of Great Lakes fish, wildlife, and harvested plant resources, including considerations for vulnerable populations who may have higher fish consumption rates. We also support the monitoring and assessment of priority contaminants and their impacts within the Great Lakes. As we open it up for your feedback, I'm also joined today by Leah Medley, EPA's BUI coordinator and acting section supervisor, and Derek Agar, who's the focus area sub-lead for chemical contaminants. We welcome your thoughts on how our work should continue.
Great, thank you, Andrea. And with this, we're going to now open it up to the input portion. So over the next about 15 minutes, I will be scouring people with hands up and the Q&A feature, as Chelsea indicated at the beginning of the webinar, for any questions that people want to ask, or more importantly, any input that people want to provide to us today. And I know that Kathy provided a great overview of the AOC work that occurred in Muskegon Lake. And I'm wondering if Kathy has any specific input related to her experience with that restoration work there. And just wait a second, Kathy, for our moderators to unmute you. And there you go.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I do have a few recommendations, I guess, for maybe improvements in the next Great Lakes Action Plan. And I think these have been discussed already, and some of them maybe have already been addressed in previous action plans. But the remediation and habitat restoration projects should either require or highly incentivize early local community engagement to identify locally important public access improvement needs. And I think that's important in older communities where maybe people have had access to shorelines when it was former industrial, but as they get developed now, it's kind of different. You don't want to trespass, right? So there are places where substantial GLRI work is being done and planned. And I think during that process, it's really important to get the community's input on what they think revitalization needs when it comes to public access to outdoor recreation in particular. I think we should also ensure that state and federal partners include and allow sufficient time and funding needed to complete long-term post-restoration monitoring of restored habitats. We've had that experience where we had funding to do the restoration of the Amico Ruddiman Creek area, but our state and federal permits required longer monitoring than what the grant agreement would allow funding for. So that was a challenge. We got through it, but it's something to be thinking about. I think also local public advisory councils or citizen advisory councils that work in these areas of concern should be eligible to receive funding support to continue post area of concern planning for a while after the AOC is delisted, because there's still monitoring work to be done. And there's also the ability to advance other Great Lakes restoration goals beyond just the limited area of concern targets for BUIs. And I think that could be a very cost-effective approach that would help communities maintain and build on these collaborative partnerships and technical expertise that have been developed through the AOC program. So these local public advisory councils aren't always a 501c3 or another type of agency. So allowing them to continue to have some PAC support, as we call it in Michigan, would be, I think, a good thing for Great Lakes restoration as a whole. And then my final one is I'd like to see land acquisition prioritized again in areas of concern. I think for a short time there was some of that, and then they quit kind of allowing for acquisition money for areas of concern in particular. But I think that should be a priority. It's done a lot of good in Muskegon Lake, where we did a 53-acre former celery farm and another 35-acre former celery farm. We reduced nutrients. We restored fish and wildlife habitat connectivity. We would have never been able to do that on those privately owned parcels if we hadn't had the land acquisition money available to areas of concern. And I think that land acquisition also helps for habitat connectivity with restored habitats and public outdoor recreation in area of concern communities. Those are my 4 recommendations, I guess, or suggestions for maybe improvements in the next action plan.
Kathy, thank you so much for that excellent input. And I wonder, has that sparked any additional comments that people want to build from? Or perhaps some questions out there as well. And I just want to encourage, if anyone wants to vocalize their input, to use the raise hand feature within Zoom. I do see we do have a question that's more general, related to the GLRI. I'll pause on trying to answer that one right now and see if there's anything else coming in related to the AOC program. This is a program that's accomplishing a lot across the entire Great Lakes Basin, all the way from Duluth, Minnesota, to the St. Lawrence River. So I'm hoping that there is some input that folks want to provide. I see Amy Rowe has her hand up. Moderators, I'll ask you to unmute Amy so she can provide her input.
Hi, thank you. Yes, this is Amy Rowe with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Kathy, can you hear me?
She shook her head, yes.
Okay, good. I was hoping Kathy could give us some examples of how, where they maybe had run into problems with some of their monitoring. What was useful for their PACs or RACs, whatever they call them, to get to what they needed next, whether it was funding or more people on the ground. Can Kathy provide more input?
Yeah,
thank you.
Well, yeah, just based on just the project that I described in the presentation earlier, the Amico project, we had 5 years of post-restoration monitoring of different types of habitat, photographs that were required, water levels. I'm looking back at my slides. I think I had a listing of several different parameters that had to be monitored. And some of that was actually a wetland delineation, which had to be done by a consultant. So we did have to figure out a way to fund that part of it for a professional to do that work. And then we were able to use a pretty well-trained volunteer who walks the bike path every day to take photographs and water elevations, because we have a gauge out there that's permanent. So, you know, it's I think mostly the consultant costs of something a volunteer couldn't do, but you also have to have an agreement with your state agency to allow that type of monitoring to happen with volunteers and a combination of, you know, consultants and a local permit holder to continue to coordinate that for 5 years, because that's not, you know, the project is done, but there's still work to be done. People kind of forget, oh, we have to still, you know, comply with this. I don't know if that helps, but the
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah. So Amy, thank you very much for the question, and Kathy, greatly appreciate the response that you're able to provide here. I do note, encourage people to continue looking at the Q&A. There are some, both in the open tab and the answer tab, there's some input that people have provided that I'd recommend you take a look at that input. We won't be, sort of highlighting every last thing that we hear during this webinar, but we are recording everything and we'll be posting the summarized input up on glri.us at a later date. But I do see we have a question that I'd like to flag for Derek Ager of EPA. And that question is, who would be considered vulnerable populations regarding your outreach? And how did you go about informing them on the risks and benefit? With your future goals expanding on this tactic, what is going to be changed to more effectively and appropriately provide this information? Derek, I'm wondering if you could touch upon how we identify, or how vulnerable populations have been identified, and what are some of the mechanisms we've gone about to informing those vulnerable populations on risks and benefits of consuming Great Lakes fish, wildlife, and harvested plant resources.
Sure. Thanks, Todd. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can.
Great. Yeah, very good question. So when we talk about vulnerable populations, we're referring to populations around the Great Lakes that are most impacted by chemicals in fish and consuming those fish. So specifically, two populations we have focused on and plan on continuing focusing on are subsistence fishers, so folks who consume fish on a regular basis for anywhere between 2 to 3 to 4 meals per week. And then the other population is women of childbearing age, because during pregnancy, these contaminants can have a profound effect on that process. So in the future, in the next action plan, we're hoping to continue that work, but also find more effective ways at reaching these populations. And a lot of this has to do with understanding how these populations are consuming information, what sort of languages are being spoken in these communities, as well as just all-around effective outreach materials for these communities.
Great. Thank you for that response, Derek. And I'd like to perhaps build upon that and ask a question. But before I ask a question, let's address a question that came in from Aaron Houghton with New Water. And the question is, will prioritization be given to watershed practices that target nutrient and sediment reduction to directly impact the BUIs identified downstream? AOC boundaries are great. However, the sources are often outside of these boundaries, and the required work often needs to be focused outside of the boundaries to bring about the changes we need within the boundaries. I'm wondering if either Andrea or Leah could address Aaron's question.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. All right, so thanks for the question, Aaron. And I think this is an important suggestion. While the work in the AOCs is limited to the boundaries itself, there are other programs under the GLRI where activities can occur to address those downstream issues. And so I think it's something that is definitely a worthwhile consideration, and something to look forward of how we address it potentially in Action Plan 4, in just maybe the AOC and other focus areas within the action plan.
Great, thank you, Andrea. And Aaron, I think that's some, not only a good question, but I think it's valuable input as well.
Leah, is there anything else to add on that?
No, I agree. Something that we would normally deal with under Focus Area 3.
Well, great. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Leah. And Aaron, as I was stating just before, good question, and thank you for that input. And that'll be input that we will be considering as we look towards developing Action Plan 4. I do see another question related to PFAS in the Great Lakes. But in the interest of time, I'm going to pause on that question. And with that, I'd like to move us to Focus Area 2, invasive species. And depending on how the rest of the webinar goes, we'll be able to come back to some of the questions or input that we want to elevate for discussion amongst the group. So to kick us off on Focus Area 2, we have Liz Tansey from EPA's Region 2 office in New York. Take it away, Liz.
All right. Hi, everyone. So yes, my name is Elizabeth Tansey, and I'm a physical scientist at the EPA and the EPA Region 2 Focus Area Lead. So this focus area includes preventing invasive species established in the Great Lakes Basin, limiting or controlling the spread of invasive species when they are first identified in the Great Lakes, and controlling invasive species where they are established. This focus area is primarily focused on aquatic invasive species, but we also support terrestrial invasive species activities when those activities are a direct benefit to the Great Lakes habitat and species. So the Great Lakes spans jurisdictional boundaries among states, tribal nations, tribal lands, municipalities, federal lands, and environmental boundaries within Canada. Over time, approximately 190 non-native species have been found in the Great Lakes, entering through connecting canals and waterways, ballast water and commercial ships, intentional or unintentional release of aquarium, bait, or aquatic culture, and the recreational boating activities. About 1/3 of those non-native species are invasive, causing socioeconomic, ecological, or human health impacts. Specific impacts include invasive plants, choking recreational waterways, changes to wetlands by invasive plants, limiting future use by fish and birds, destruction of mature riparian forests by forest pests and local cold water fisheries, and direct parasitism by lamprey on native fish important to recreational and commercial fishing. So the GLRI Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding supports federal, tribal, and state agencies, as well as their local partners, to enhance sites degraded by aquatic, wetland, and terrestrial invasive species. Funding made available by GLRI also allows for collaboration and innovative approaches to invasive species management. Advancing our knowledge on the most effective and efficient ways to reverse impact is important to places in the Great Lakes. So on the slide, you can see some of the specific project and examples from GLRI Focus Area 2. And today I'm joined by managers and staff by EPA Great Lakes Region in the Office of Chicago. And finally, we welcome your thoughts on how our work should continue for Action Plan 4. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. I appreciate the overview. And I see that we already have a hand raised. So I'd like for the moderators to unmute Maurice's line. And once they do so, Maurice, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, my comment is, why is GLRI increasing the number of big head and silver carp in the Illinois River? And they do this by subsidizing commercial harvesting. The science is very clear that unless 83% of the population is removed every year in a reproducing area, you increase the population. Peer-reviewed literature has stated that the big head and silver carp density is greater in the Illinois, lower Illinois, where it's been the most heavily harvested. So why is GLRI funding increasing these invasive fish?
So Maurice, thank you very much for both the comment and input and question as well. I want to see whether or not there's anyone from EPA or Fish and Wildlife Service that would like to address the question that Maurice posed. Maurice, I'm not sure if we have anyone specifically on the line right now that can speak to that specific area within GLRI. So I'm just going to pause for a few seconds and see if we have that.
So
if not, oh, I
Todd,
hear
this is Chris. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
I don't see my picture. I don't know if I'm on the screen or not, but so the GLRI, we work very closely, as I said, going back to partnership, we work very closely with the Fish and Wildlife Service in the area you're describing, the state of Illinois, the Army Corps of Engineers. There are a number of federal and state agencies who, working through something called the Invasive Carp Regional Coordinating Committee, we develop action plans every year that decide what actions we're going to do. So I'll be candid, the news that you're sharing with me that we're increasing the population of carp, that is news to me. I've never heard that argument before. I think our view is we're doing what we can to try to get fish out of the river. We are using commercial fishing to try to reduce the population in some of the stretches of the river. And we think we've been effective. But I will confess, I've never heard anyone make the argument that we are actually increasing the population by doing the commercial harvesting that we're doing. Again, we're doing that, I think, to get fish out of the river and deplete the population. I do think, from looking at the maps, we have been successful in stabilizing the advance of the silver and bighead up the river, and indeed perhaps pushing the population down just a bit. But as they say, eternal vigilance is required to keep an eye on that. So I can't really answer your question because, again, that's an argument that I've never heard. But I think as a result of this conversation, we will follow up with our partners. And like Todd said, if there is anyone from FWS or the Corps who can address the question more specifically, I would encourage them to do so right now if they're on the call.
So thank you, Chris. I appreciate the response there. Maurice, thank you very much for your input as well.
Chris, may I send you the data? So
Maurice, what I'm going to suggest is that I I believe in the chat function, there is a GLRI Action Plan 4 email address. If you can send the data and information directly to that, it'll make its way to myself and Chris, and we will be able to share that appropriately with our partners of the Invasive Carp Regional Coordinating Committee.
And Maurice, I'm just going to say yes to your question. We would love to see it.
Thank you.
Great. So, you know, I see that there is another comment related to the use of eDNA, and that work in this area should support the use of eDNA on project design and implementation, on the detection of invasive species early on, that will support early action. I guess I will throw out a question for those that are participating with us today. Are there other tools that we should be highlighting or emphasizing as we develop Action Plan 4? Are there other pathways that we should be devoting more or additional attention to prevent new non-native species and potentially invasive species entering the Great Lakes? That is the sort of input that would greatly help us as we develop Action Plan 4. And I do know eDNA has been a valuable tool in our work on a lot of invasive species related activities. Perhaps some more food for thought would be, are there invasive species in the Great Lakes region that you don't think the GLRI has dedicated enough resources to, and you feel that that should be a direction that Action Plan 4 takes us on? So again, we'd be very interested in, on that control side, what is it that you think the GLRI should be dedicating the next 5 years of implementation action on? I'm just going to quickly see if we have any hands up. I am not seeing any hands up. I do note we still have a few questions from Focus Area 1 and a general question. Again, I'd like to table those for now. And with that, Liz, again, thank you for providing the overview for this focus area. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Focus Area 3. And we'll turn it over to Santina Wortman from EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office.
Am I unmuted?
I can hear you, Santina.
Okay, thank you. Very good. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here representing Focus Area 3 along with my colleague Danielle Green, who couldn't be here today. But you'll see this is broken up into two sections because in the Great Lakes we support projects to address two primary sources of non-point source pollution, which are runoff from agricultural and from urban areas. And just in case you're not familiar with the term, that non-point source pollution is more simply called polluted runoff. So it's caused by rainfall or snowmelt that moves over and through the ground. And as it moves, it picks up and carries away pollutants. They can be natural or man-made pollutants and deposits them into our waterways. So these can be things like sediment, nutrients from fertilizer, bacteria from pet or animal waste, and so on. And it's usually a fairly complex problem to address and requires a variety of tactics to address it. Under the Focus Area 3 of GLRI, our primary concern is nutrient runoff, which can cause harmful and nuisance algal blooms, also known as HABs. And the areas which more routinely experience them in the Great Lakes are Western Lake Erie, as you've probably heard, as well as Green Bay in Lake Michigan and Saginaw Bay in Lake Huron. So in each of these areas, agricultural non-point source pollution is the primary source of the excess nutrient runoff that contributes to those blooms. And so a lot of what we do under GLRI, working with our federal and state partners, particularly with the NRCS, is we leverage and build on the existing local soil and water conservation programs who provide direct assistance to farmers to improve management on their fields. And we're proud to say that through GLRI since 2014, we've more than doubled the number of farmland acres that are enrolled in voluntary conservation programs in those priority areas that I described. So in the watersheds that contribute to those, the Maumee River watershed, the Fox River, and the Saginaw River. And so that assistance to farmers is so that they can try different conservation methods, things like routine soil testing combined with ways to minimally disturb the soil while you're planting and applying fertilizer and keeping the ground covered with plants year round so that you're really building up the health of the soil so that it can hold water and sediment better. We also support farmer education and outreach, so demonstration farm networks. This is where a participating farm will host a field day or a tour for neighboring farms, and really to show them the types of practices that they are trying and how they're working on their fields. That kind of peer-to-peer learning we find really helps motivate other farmers to try these practices. And so in partnership with NRCS, we now have 8 demonstration farm networks in the Great Lakes Basin that are supporting dozens of farms. And we're looking to grow that network under the next action plan. We'd like to add more demonstration farms, and we'd also like to bring in a greater variety of farming types. So for example, representation from more women farmers or smaller farms, grazing farms, things like that. So in the next 5 years, we will continue the main tactic of supporting that direct farmer assistance and outreach. As I said, expanding the demonstration farm network. And in addition to working with farmers on their fields, it's really important that we promote practices that slow down and filter agricultural runoff once it leaves their fields. So things like streamside buffers, widening floodplains on drainage ditches, and creating wetlands and receiving water bodies to assimilate those nutrients and hold back that flow. We are really interested in any innovative methods. We're currently going to be testing, for example, a slow release fertilizer, innovative ways to reduce that runoff, and demonstrating any new or more effective ways that we can try to address this really challenging problem in these areas. For the next slide, turning to urban runoff, we also support green infrastructure projects in the Great Lakes. This is really based on a more community-based efforts to reduce untreated stormwater runoff, which has a myriad of impacts to nearshore water quality. Traditionally, green infrastructure would include things like porous pavement, bioswales, rain gardens, things like that in urban areas that you can then infiltrate stormwater runoff to prevent the runoff from occurring. In addition, we're really interested in doing more work in the watershed, such as restoring floodplains and building wetlands, because those again can help slow down and soak up and filter that runoff. It can also help reduce stream bank erosion and protect those stream banks, which then results in a more lasting impact to protect water quality. So in the next action plan, some of our areas of focus are that we would like to prioritize funding for these types of projects in underserved communities. To date, we have implemented more than 300 local watershed projects in Great Lakes communities. We've protected more than 60 miles of streams and shoreline, and we have prevented over 500 million gallons of untreated stormwater runoff from entering the Great Lakes. So we'd like to continue to build on those efforts. We also recognize that we need to incorporate or really consider carefully the influence of climate change and climate resiliency so that the projects that we're building can remain effective under future climate, particularly with our increased storm events and increased severity of storms, wanting to make sure that when we're restoring floodplains and wetlands, that we're doing that with those best future projections of what those conditions will be. So those are the areas we're focusing on. Todd?
Great. Thank you, Santina. Great overview of what we've accomplished and where we intend and would like to go in the future for this focus area. Now I'd like to open it up. Please raise your hand if you have a question or would just like to provide input as well, or provide your feedback and questions in the Q&A box. I will note, Kirsten, I note your input on the Focus Area 2 activities, including the identification of focal species. Great. This is exactly the sort of input that we're hoping to hear through this and other sessions. But I see Daniela has her hand up, and Daniela, you're already unmuted. So if you would like, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. And thank you for providing this overview today and taking suggestions. So one of the big things in Chicago is that we have been working on green infrastructure projects now for, over 20 years. And what we see that is problematic is that there is no support for maintenance on any of these projects. So there are actual moratoriums that some of the city departments have on building any new green infrastructure because there is no to limited funding to maintain these past the installation. And so thinking about really working in underserved communities, their needs, the maintenance cannot only be provided by the community that is living there. There needs to be somebody paid to be able to maintain the plants are established, which sometimes takes 3 years. So just to consider that there's a lot of workforce development that can be provided through this, and in pushing people towards having some input to help this. Thank you.
So Daniela, great input. I will say it was cutting out for me a little bit. Hopefully that was just me and everyone else on the call.
Me too.
But was able to hear it, so maybe not. I'd encourage you, if you could follow up in writing on the email that's in the chat box. That is exactly the sort of input that I think is, that we want to hear as we develop Action Plan 4, and in particular as we look at these areas of trying to expand and prioritize green infrastructure projects in underserved communities. So thank you very much for that comment. Any other hands raised that people want to provide any input on verbally? If not, I'm going to turn it over to, I see we have many more questions and input that have been identified in the Q&A. And I do want to remind folks, there is this option called, and I don't know what the technical term is, but if you give it the thumbs up, and the more people that give it the thumbs up, it raises higher in the list. And those are be ones that we will try and ensure that we address during this session here today. But it doesn't matter. All the input is the same, and we'll be looking at all the input, whether or not it has 10 thumbs up or none. So I do see a question here that Santina, I would like to kick it over to you. And the question is the new emphasis on wetland restoration and floodplain restoration limited to urban settings, or would this apply to rural and suburban areas as well?
It would apply in all areas of the watersheds, whether it's urban or, adjacent to farmland, for example. We often work in that area. So both areas it would be. In fact, we're already supporting and partnering with the state of Ohio on a number of their wetland restoration projects that are being funded by the H2 Ohio initiative. So where there are wetlands that can be built to either take agricultural runoff or in more urban, suburban areas to just help manage those high flows. We can support either of those types of projects.
Great. Thank you, Santina, and thank you for that question. I'm going through the Q's and A's right now. I know that this is not a question for you, Santina, but this has received many thumbs up. So I will share that in the interest of everyone hearing that on the call, and that there's some input provided that said, if not already planned, providing education regarding the green infrastructure in urban communities should be vital to the plan, as more urban areas are least likely to be well informed of the benefits they'll receive from the green infrastructure being implemented in their neighborhood. So great comment. Thank you very much. And I do see another question, Santina, that I will kick your way. And this is a question that came in from Laura Campbell. And that question is there an opportunity to recognize more areas for non-point source reductions that are within the Great Lakes watershed, but may not be within the priority areas such as the Western Lake Erie Basin or Saginaw Bay? Is there an opportunity to expand the timeline for project implementation and continuation to both expand participation and better assess benefits? So Santina, maybe if you can address that first question related to work being done across the basin versus just in priority areas like the Western Lake Erie Basin or Saginaw Bay.
Sure. So while those Western Lake Erie, Saginaw Bay, and Green Bay watersheds are the priority focus, they're not, our funding isn't exclusive to those areas. We do work throughout the Great Lakes watersheds. In terms of prioritizing, to the extent that those other areas are impacting and have a connection to the Great Lakes would be one of the highest deciding factors for funding. So if it's a small inland lake in the middle of, for example, the state of Michigan, that probably wouldn't compete as well for funding, but it is still eligible. We just tend to focus on where are we going to see those greatest impacts to the nearshore areas of the Great Lakes. And I would say probably the split is probably half and half or so as far as work happening in those three areas versus beyond those areas for the whole focus area.
Great. Thank you, Santina. And we're getting lots of input and questions in the Q&A. Great. Keep them coming. Next, I'm going to turn to a question from Sarah Pearson. And Sarah has asked, has any consideration been given to encouraging / incentivizing communities to prepare and implement source water protection plans, surface water intake protection plans? These plans encourage communities to think forward, assess sources of contamination, identify non-point sources, develop contingency plans to address issues, and engage the community in planning, education, and protection practices. Santina, can you address that first question?
Right. Well, I think that the source water protection would be one of the many ways that we try to tie our work to kind of broader watershed or localized watershed planning efforts, water quality planning efforts. So one of the things that we look for in funding a project is how well it's connected to the watershed's needs, in a more general sense, the community's needs, and to the extent that's articulated in any other type of water quality management plan, such as a source water protection plan, that would definitely be a consideration for us for funding. We also look to at kind of the more broad level, just the lake-wide action and management plans if a project is a priority in that. But I think the source water protection, there may be ways we can make that connection stronger or more explicit, but it is something that would be considered as as a way to, strengthen a project if it were in line with protecting their local drinking water.
Great. Thank you, Santina. And I think we have time for maybe one more question. So I'm going to pause and see if anyone wants to raise their hand and either ask a question or provide us some input. And there's lots of great input coming in through the Q&A. We're not going to be able to address each and every one of those here today, but everything is important, and we will be looking at everything closely as we work on Action Plan 4. See some great comments on work in Detroit, work in the Fox River Basin in Wisconsin. A comment about the happy to see the increased focus on stormwater runoff. So I guess Santina will finish with this last question from Mike McCarthy. And his question is, what kind of priority will be given to underserved communities, and will rural communities with agricultural runoff see an increased priority?
Well, I think that's a good question and something that we'll be looking for input on and looking to address in the next plan. As I said before, I know the sense is, because we're focused on these three priority areas, that, as you've said in your comment, they're getting most of the funding. I think the funding is distributed a little bit more evenly throughout the watershed, just based on the way we are able to have, I guess, projects come to us in a number of different ways. So, for example, a project on tribal land can get prioritized and up through a few different chains, and other kind of local water quality impact issues can get kind of raised to get that prioritization. So it's not to say that it's not already happening, but the degree to which that happens, we could probably improve on. And then as far as underserved communities, this is a priority of our entire administration right now. So I would anticipate that we'll do everything that we can. I know we currently have an RFA, a request for funding right now, to try to look at setting the stage for being able to work with those communities in a more efficient way, because they often can't come in and compete as well at that local level for grant funding. And so I think that's one of the ways that we'll try to leverage that mechanism to reach more underserved communities.
Great. Thank you, Santina. And with that, we're going to close out Focus Area 3 and move on to Focus Area 4. But I'd be remiss if I didn't put in a plug for the request for applications that Santina did just mention. For any organization that is interested or just wants to learn more about the program, there is a webinar tomorrow. So please scour either glri.us or our epa.gov/Great Lakes funding page to find information on how to register for that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Pawalski from EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office as well, to talk about Focus Area 4.
Thanks, Todd. We can go to our first slide. So I'm Matt Pawalski. I'm a physical scientist at EPA and manager of GLNPO's Great Lakes Coastal Wetland Monitoring Program. Focus Area 4 includes on-the-ground and in-the-water restoration and protection projects that improve habitats necessary for native species and that provide economic, cultural, and recreational opportunities to the Great Lakes community. This focus area also supports needed science, assessment, propagation, and stocking of native species, so populations of endangered, threatened, or culturally important species are not lost from the Great Lakes. This focus area works throughout the Great Lakes Basin, from upland forested areas to tributaries and rivers along our coastline and in the open lake areas. So species projects often have habitat components, but here are some examples of projects that have helped Great Lakes species like piping plover, lake trout, and lakeside daisy. And we can go to the next slide. The Great Lakes, which are, as you know, the largest group of freshwater lakes on Earth, contain more than 10,000 miles of shoreline and 30,000 islands. The region's four-season climate supports boating, fishing, diving, beach enjoyment, and other forms of recreation that support the region's proud outdoor heritage. The environment of the Great Lakes region is blessed with wide swaths of forest and wilderness areas, sand dunes, coastal marshes, rocky shorelines, lake plain prairies, savannas, fens, wetlands, and other landscapes, and contain features that are globally unique. These habitats provide drinking water, transportation, power, and a wide array of recreational opportunities. The Great Lakes environment supports a world-class fishery with an estimated 180 species of native fish, including large and smallmouth bass, muskellunge, northern pike, lake herring, whitefish, walleye, and lake trout. Still, the Great Lakes habitats have been significantly lost or impacted by pollution, development, resource extraction, and invasive species. These losses and a multitude of other threats affect the health of the Great Lakes fish and wildlife. So here are some more habitat-specific projects, examples from GLRI Focus Area 4. And with that, we can open up for feedback.
Thank you, Matt. I greatly appreciate the overview of the Habitat and Species Focus Area. And again, want to open it up for any input, any questions that you may have for Matt. And again, a reminder that use the thumbs up button. You click on that, you can elevate something that was either asked before and answered in the answer tab or still in the open tab. I do see a comment that has come in from Kirsten James, and her comment, give me a second, it just moved my screen, was suggesting that wanted to see additional prioritization given an action plan 4 focused on genetic diversity for long-term sustainability and health, specifically related to the impacts of fish stocking on native species. So Kirsten, thank you for that comment. I see another comment from, and Joanna, I'm not going to try the last name, so Joanna P, and it's actually a question. And the question is, are state endangered or important species considered in Focus Area 4 or only federally designated species? Matt, are you able to address that question?
I would imagine that any species that is state endangered, would fall under that threatened, species category within the basin as a whole. And threatened species, of course, are important. So,
great, thank you, Matt, and Joanna. Hopefully that answered your question. So again, I'm going to pause for a second to see if anyone wants to raise their hand to verbally share some input or ask a question. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the Q&A then. I do see a question about providing a link to tomorrow's webinar in the chat. So again, the webinar tomorrow is not on GLR Action Plan 4, but it is on EPA's environmental justice request for applications. And I'm going to ask if someone from the Glenpoe team can add that to the chat so folks could register for that. I see a question from Jaden. And Jaden is asking, has this focus area been implementing the same desire to implement indigenous knowledge of the restoration areas to better work in it? So Matt, perhaps ask you, how has indigenous knowledge been incorporated both into what's been accomplished under GLRI and also perhaps looking forward under Action Plan 4?
Yeah, I think I'm probably not the best person to answer this question. It's possible Beth might have a thought on it, or we could get back in touch after the fact.
Okay, and Jaden, I guess what I would offer just as a quick follow-up is we work very closely with the tribal nations across the Great Lakes, not just those within EPA Region 5, but also in EPA Region 2. And Indigenous knowledge has been a very important component to much of the work that is directly implemented by the tribal nations through what we have is called a Great Lakes Restoration Initiative Distinct Tribal Program. But thank you for your input and comment related to the importance of that. And we would agree with you. I do see there's Guido has provided a comment, and I'd be remiss if I didn't to share his comment as well. And that is that he appreciates the emphasis on wetland restoration funding. Wetlands are critical for fish and wildlife habitat, climate adaptability, carbon sequestration, flood retention, nutrient reduction, etc. Can't get a better investment to assist GLRI goals. So thank you, Guido. And for those that want to continue to see that emphasis on wetland restoration, give the comment a thumbs up or provide your own comments related to wetland restoration. So Matt, we do have another question. And this question is, has there been any focus area 4 projects implemented that have protected tracts of land-based or aquatic habitats through the purchase of conservation easements or purchase of lands by entities charged with securing/managing permanent land water conservation?
I do know that there has been some land acquisition, funding provided for that in the Apostle Islands of Lake Superior, for example. But I don't know of many other examples. You can go on the GLRI website, EPA's GLRI website, and explore that type of information.
Great, thank you, Matt. And just to further address the question as well, is that the acquisition of lands is definitely something that has been a component of GLRI since the beginning, and will likely continue to be so. And for those that want to see that play a more substantial role or a different role, again, we would value your input on direction there. I'm going to pause for a second again as to see if anyone wants to raise their hand and provide some verbal input and or ask a question. Okay. So with that, I do want to note, Daniela, we do see now your input that you verbally provided in the Q&A box. Thank you so much for providing that input this way as well. Very valuable input, and we will definitely be considering that as we move forward. So I'll pause maybe for another 30 seconds or so to see if there are any other focus area 4 comments or questions that we should pick up. If not, we will move on to focus area 5. All right, and Sally, thank you for your comment. Sally Howard has commented that it's so difficult to create new habitat. Sally, the GLRI since the beginning has recognized the importance of not only restoration but protection of important habitats as well. And your comment related to the stamp plant in Alabama, New York. So again, thank you for that comment. And with that, in the interest of time and perhaps an ability to come back to some questions, we are going to turn it over to focus area 5. And we have Beth Hinchy-Malloy from EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office that will present the overview.
Hi, I'm Beth Hinchy-Malloy, a supervisory physical scientist here at EPA, and I'm the lead for Focus Area 5, which is the Foundations for Future Restoration Actions focus area. And this focus area includes 2 important foundations for Great Lakes restoration: science and education. So if you want to move to the next slide, science is maybe go one more slide. I started with science first, sorry. Great, thanks. Science is a key foundation to any successful ecosystem restoration and protection program. For resource managers to be able to take actions to address chemical, physical, and biological stressors to the Great Lakes, it's essential that we assess the overall health of the Great Lakes and identify and investigate the most significant problems affecting their health. GLRI federal, state, and tribal partners have conducted Great Lakes monitoring and investigated stressors such as harmful algal blooms and impacts of current and future lake levels and ice cover and wave energy on our coastal resources. And we are sharing those results and information with managers and other stakeholders who need them. Under the next action plan, we will continue to support targeted science projects and to implement programs that will help track the effectiveness of GLRI projects and inform the future restoration actions. So now if you want to go back to education, I'll cover the GLRI education activities that support the overall goal of engaging the next generations to foster Great Lakes stewardship and to promote conservation. To achieve these goals, GLRI supports education programs with a focus on underserved communities by implementing Great Lakes place-based, hands-on learning for K-12 students, as well as teaching people environmental restoration skills through environmental workforce development programs. Under the last action plan, for example, over 220,000 students were engaged in such activities, and more than 1,300 teachers were trained in promoting and providing learning experiences that promote Great Lakes stewardship. And we plan to continue the support of Great Lakes education and workforce development with an even greater focus on underserved communities in the next action plan. So other EPA staff who had this work are here with me today. They are Derek Egger, who's EPA's Focus Area 5 sub-lead for science, and Nicole Singleton, EPA's Focus Area 5 sub-lead for education. And we welcome your thoughts on how our work should continue under Focus Area 5.
Thank you so much, Beth. With that, I want to open it up to see if anyone wants to raise their hand and provide some verbal input or ask Beth and or team a question. And I will note there was quite a number of questions and input provided in the Q&A box that related to workforce development. In particular, I think during the discussion on green infrastructure. So I'm wondering if any of those individuals have either a question or a further piece of feedback that they want to provide related directly to this focus area on workforce development in Focus Area 5.
I think there's a request to go ahead one slide so folks can read the future goals under science.
Thank you for.
We're continue to conduct monitoring and implement projects to assess ecosystem health in the Great Lakes, and we will continue to be looking at stressors and drivers of harmful algal blooms. Really trying to understand the impacts of the current climate changes we're seeing in the Great Lakes and project future climate changes to the Great Lakes under this focus area.
Great, thank you, Beth. We do have a question in. And it's from an anonymous participant. And the question is, can you go into a little more details on what these hands-on education programs look like and their role with more local groups?
Absolutely. Our hands-on, place-based experiential education programs really have a lot of different partners. They take a lot of different approaches to this. For example, the NOAA's Great Lakes Be Wet grant funding program provides financial assistance to applicants to develop curriculum, to get students into the watersheds doing stewardship projects, to help teachers develop those skills so they can engage students in those activities. So those are different grant offerings that are available. We have funded partners in the state of Ohio, for example, through Ohio DNR, who have developed kayaking programs for students to take them out into the watersheds to experience firsthand what the benefits of Great Lakes restoration are. They kayak through wetlands that are being restored through H2 Ohio's program and really learn about the importance of that work. We've got programming underway at the system of wildlife refuges that Fish and Wildlife administers throughout the Great Lakes. These are urban areas, urban wildlife refuges where there is educational programming developed to get students, into those systems where they can, learn how to fish, really learn to appreciate, being in nature, and that really helps develop that, advancement of Great Lakes literacy and understanding in those systems, as well as the National Park Service is, improving visitor enhancement related to their Great Lakes national parks, and providing educational programs at those institutions as well. And I guess the last example I'll mention is the partnership we have with the Great Lakes Sea Grant Center for Great Lakes Literacy, who's really working one-on-one with educators to develop Great Lakes curriculum that can be used in the classroom. Again, training those teachers how they can bring Great Lakes data into their classrooms, how they can develop stewardship programs with their students. And again, a lot of our partners work very locally because it's, like I said, it's place-based. We want those students, really understanding their watershed, thinking about how stewardship, what they can contribute to stewardship, and how they can, share that with their families and communities. So it's very place-based, and we work with a lot of local partners in that regard. I think you're muted, Todd.
Thank you, Beth. I knew it happened at least once during the webinar. This isn't a question, but I do want to share some feedback that has been provided by Kathy Furterbar. And that is, as population is aging, there's a larger segment of population in older adult continuing education efforts. Through programs at senior centers and community colleges, as educators, we could use resources that could be used to reach this population, to educate them in areas of climate change, storm runoff, etc. Clearly, these hands-on programs, which I've utilized via NOAA and Great Lakes Alliance, but these aren't physically realistic for older adults. So Kathy, great comment that we will look at further. I see we do have another anonymous participant, which has provided some additional comments related to workforce development, and perhaps looking at partnering with nonprofits and municipal agencies and community-led organizations. So great feedback, exactly the sort of feedback that we want to hear as part of this session.
Todd, I could mention that a couple other programs that I'd like to highlight. We've got a really great example of a STEM-based program that the Michigan Office of Great Lakes and Energy has implemented with the Michigan DNR and their STEM network, where they train teachers to work with students to give them hand-on experiences that help the students develop that knowledge to help them prepare for STEM careers. So that's, you know, something that's underway with the state of Michigan. And also through that distinct tribal program that you mentioned, there have been, you know, education projects related to, you know, training tribal community members about the importance of wild rice restoration. And those programs do also include more than just, you know, K through 12 students. They are for the community.
Great, thank you, Beth. And with that as a comment, I do want to point out for everyone that's participating today, you know, if you want to learn more about the GLRI, please go to glri.us. There are news stories posted, which very succinctly summarize some great GLRI work. And we also have annual reports to Congress, which summarize, you know, great success stories that have occurred in each of the 5 focus areas as well. So please take a look at those. So Beth, I see a comment or a question in about, we were recently on a boat tour on the Jackson from Grand Valley State University in Indiana. Will funding for this type of outreach return?
I share your passion for the Jackson. It's an incredible educational boat. Yeah, we are always looking for good suggestions on the programming that's resonating in communities. So this is great feedback to hear that, you know, you found it a really great type of outreach platform to spread the importance of the Great Lakes themselves to our, you know, well-being, and then the importance of, you know, studying them and restoring them. So thanks for this input. Like I said, we are, you know, really looking for feedback to put into the next action plan. So thank you for this.
All right, I will pause for a second and see if there is anyone that wants to raise their hand and speak verbally. All right, not seeing any. I will go back to the Q&A. And I appreciate everyone using the thumbs up button. I will say it makes it a little hard for me to navigate sometimes because things are jumping around backwards and forwards. But there was a question in here about what happened to the Lake Forum or Focus Area 5 from an anonymous participant. Focus Area 5, what happened to the Lake Forums? They were great for reaching the public. And we've organized our webinar here really on the 5 focus areas of the GLRI. But if you go look at Action Plan 3, there are some overarching principles for how all the work under GLRI is conducted. And those include things like communication and outreach. It's critical at so many different scales of what we do in GLRI, at that project scale, at that watershed scale, at that lake-wide scale, and at that basin-wide scale. So I appreciate that comment and would welcome you know, more comments on things that relate to those operating principles as well. You know, are we doing enough on environmental justice across the 5 focus areas? Are we doing enough on climate change across these 5 focus areas? Is there something that we should consider more holistically in the action plan as we move forward? All right, just taking one last look through the comments area and questions. Gonna see if there are any focus area 5 ones that got elevated up. Bear with me. All right, so I'm not seeing any. So last call, I'll pause 30 seconds or so to see if there are any other questions on the science and education focus area. maybe I won't pause 30 seconds. I'm a little, I guess, impatient right now. Let's move on. Oh, I see we do have a hand up. So I'm going to ask the moderators to unmute the line of Drew Schaefer. And Drew, if you could, before you provide your input or feedback or question, if you can just identify yourself and who or what organization you're with, or I'd appreciate it.
Hello, I'm Drew. I'm not from any organization. I'm from Pennsylvania, and I just tuned in while at work just to hear about the webinar. But on the education side, when I was in high school in Pennsylvania, we had in one of my classes, a wildlife biology class, we actually took care of a bunch of little baby trout, and then monitored pH and water quality, all that, and then we learned about them as well. It was a whole learning process about water health and about ecosystem health, and then eventually released them into one of the streams around there. But is there any education in classrooms that you guys were thinking about doing?
Hi, I can answer that question. I'm Nicole Singleton, the education co-lead. And yes, we do currently have a Salmon in the Classroom grant in Michigan that does exactly that, of course, with salmon fry. They go through the water quality, learn about them, their importance to the ecosystem, how important the water quality is, and also release them in local watersheds. Thanks for sharing.
I just remember learning a ton from doing that. So I just thought that was something great.
So Nicole, thank you for the response. And Drew, thank you so much for the comment and question. It's great to hear how there are programs that are done GLRI or perhaps even non-GLRI that are focusing in the classroom on the use that has this sort of benefit. And that's really what the goal is within this focus area, is educating that next generation. Not everyone may become a scientist or an engineer or a policy maker or work in the environmental field even, but we want, all of the people living around the Great Lakes or that enjoy the Great Lakes or, use them for many other purposes to be able to make informed decisions. So thank you for that. All right, I'm just checking the Q&A one last time. So I do want to quickly go back to a question that Jessica Schultz offered up right in the beginning of this webinar, a general GLRI question. So Jessica had said, not necessarily regarding Focus Area 1, but could you explain how the GLRI appropriated funding is divided between focus areas and also divided between federal agencies to utilize or disperse? So federal budget, federal budgeting is, it's a complicated topic. So I'm gonna do the best I can in about 30 seconds to address that. The Regional Working Group, which is a collection of federal agencies that oversee the implementation of the GLRI. EPA chairs that regional working group, but it is that group that at a very high level decides how resources are distributed across the focus areas. And many things are looked at between priorities, how we are doing achieving our measures of progress, and other factors. But then it's very much a bottom-up approach where we rely on all of our federal partners, all of our state and tribal partners to identify that collection of projects and portfolios, projects and programs that are best needed to implement the GLRI and achieve our measures of success. So hopefully that's a quick 30-second overview of that question. And with that, I know there is quite a few other comments and questions, or more so comments here. But in the interest of time, I'd like to turn it back over to Chris Korleski to provide a few additional words to close us out today. But before I do so, thank you all. I think this was a very valuable session. I know it was for me, and we will be looking at all of this feedback over the next year and a half as we work on Action Plan 4. So thank you.
So, Todd, thank you for doing a great job moderating today. That was very well handled. And thank you to all the participants for all the comments and the questions. I've been sitting back here listening with great eagerness, and I really appreciate the specificity of a number of the comments. I will just take this opportunity one more time, use that email. If you'd like to elaborate or provide more comprehensive comments, that's a great tool to use. But mostly, I think this has been a very good session. I do encourage people, if you are at all interested, to attend the RFA webinar tomorrow. And just a quick inside baseball note, EPA folks, if you can gather in my office immediately afterwards, I'd like to do a very quick debriefing. So everyone, thank you again so much. And Todd, back to you.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Just want to reiterate the points that Chris made. For more information, please go to glri.us. Go to glri.us/action plan. I believe all of the links I've provided in chat. They should be in your invitation for today's session as well. So what's coming up next is we have 4 planned in-person sessions coming up over the next roughly 6 weeks. They will be in Superior, Wisconsin on July 12th, Rochester, New York on July 19th, Milwaukee, Wisconsin on July 25th, and Detroit, Michigan on August 15th. They will be set up similar to this, although it would be a great opportunity for you to interact directly with subject matter experts of federal, state, and or tribal representatives that are very involved in the work of GLRI, and for you to ask questions, but more importantly, provide your input on what you think the GLRI should be doing over the next 5 years. We will also have another virtual session, and that's planned for August 23rd. All of the remaining sessions are planned for 6 to 8 p.m., the in-person ones at local time. And the virtual one will be 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern time, if I'm not mistaken. I think that is in the meeting chat. Again, use that email address and keep the input coming in. This was helpful. So I just want to, again, thank you all for today's session. And I wish you all a great rest of the day.